Welcome to this Enabling Water Smart Communities webinar. We'll just wait for another minute or so to let people join. Good afternoon if you've just joined. We're just waiting for another minute or so. Okay, well, I think we've got a fair few that have joined now, so I think we'll make a start. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Enabling Water Smart Communities webinar. This is the second webinar of our autumn series. So my name is Kat Moncrief. I'm from CIWEM, and I'll be chairing the webinar today. CIWEM is the Chartered Institution of Water and Environmental Management, and we're one of the key partners in the Enabling Water Smart Communities project. We lead on communications and engagement. Just very quickly on CIWEM, we're the Chartered Institution of Water and Environmental Management, and we're a chartered professional body and independent charity, and we're dedicated to improving water and environmental management for the benefit of people and planet. And we represent thousands of members across the water and environmental management sector. So as I said, this is the second webinar in our autumn series. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into water reuse safety plans, and I'm joined by Vicky and Sian here today. So this will be looking into how we plan and mitigate for potential health and safety risks associated with on-site water reuse and recycling. But I'll leave it to them to go into the details of that. Before we get going, I just want to do some sort of housekeeping things. So if you can go on to the next slide, please. So the meeting's being recorded. If you have any objections to this recording being made public, please let us know. If you experience any technical issues during the webinar, please raise your hand and use the chat feature on Zoom and let us know what the problem is, and we'll try and sort that out for you. Then for questions, we're using the Q&A facility. So on Zoom, you've got chat and Q&A. So we'll do the questions in the Q&A, and we'll come to those at the end of the presentations. But for anything kind of technical, use the chat feature. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, next slide then, please. So with me today, I've got Sian Hills. She spent 30 years at Thames Water in research management and innovation, both in the UK and internationally, and she specialises in water recycling and reuse. That was followed by 10 to 15 years of experience as an independent consultant, including project manager for UK WER and various water resource related assignments for academia and industry, and including this Enabling Water Smart Communities project. Vicky has 30 years in the water sector. She's a director at ARUP, and ARUP is one of the key delivery partners of the Enabling Water Smart Communities project. And they've both worked together for many years previously, and they worked on the Olympic Park water recycling plant, which is one of the things that we'll be talking about later in this webinar. Okay, next slide, please. So before we get going, I'm going to give a quick overview of the Enabling Water Smart Communities project, just 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, next slide, please. So the Enabling Water Smart Communities project is an Ofwat innovation project, and it's all about exploring the relationship between water management, community practices, and housing development. And it aims to unlock opportunities for delivering water smart communities and ensuring the long-term stewardship of water. And you can see there are many delivery partners involved, including water companies, academic research institutions, we've got consultancies there, charity WaterWise has been involved. We also have an independent program board which guides the project, and that's made up of some developer organisations and relevant government bodies. Next slide, please. So why do we need this project about water smart communities? Well, there are many shared issues faced by the water and housing sectors, and these are illustrated by the news items and stats on this slide. These issues include water scarcity, so many homes are being delayed because there simply isn't enough water available to supply those homes. And as climate change bites, the risk of flooding is also rising, and the Environment Agency, as you can see from the figures there, estimates that 8 million properties are at risk of flooding by 2050. There's also many areas which lack sewage capacity, and that's delaying house building as well. HBF in their recent Drain on the Nation report estimated that nearly 30,000 homes are being held up because of inadequate sewage infrastructure. So as you can see, there are lots of challenges faced by the housing sector and the water sector together, and the project is trying to overcome those challenges. And we're looking at ways that we can address those challenges in a holistic and integrated way, and in a way that ensures the climate resilience of those new homes and their sustainability. Okay, next slide, please. So just very quickly, there's some terms that I've shared there, which I just want to kind of clarify really what we mean by them for the project. So an enabling water smart community is essentially where water-related assets and systems such as rainwater harvesting, sustainable drainage are included at the design stage of place and really built into its fabrication. But it's not just about the hardware, it's also about the software as well. So it's about members of the community understanding and valuing and taking ownership of those water-related assets and systems as well, to make sure that the value of water and its sustainability is really enhanced. The other term that I wanted to just explain was integrated water management. So this is about a holistic approach to water. And sorry, on to the next slide, thank you. Yes, a holistic approach to water. So developing solutions that address those things in the middle of the circle. So water supply, flooding and water quality, addressing those things in a joined up way. And integrated water management is at the heart of the water smart communities concept. It can happen at a number of scales. So you can see on the right-hand side there, the different scales it can happen. In the project, we're looking at integrated water management at a sort of development site level, but how water is managed at higher levels like catchment level and regional level is also really important too. Okay, I'm going to leave it there and pass on to Vicky and Sean to talk through water reuse safety plans.
Okay, thank you very much, Kat. I'm in the same room with Vicky, so we're going to give this presentation together. Hopefully it will go smoothly. Just a very brief overview of what we're going to cover in the next half an hour. Give a bit of a background and a brief summary of how we got to this point. A review of the concept of safety plans, and we'll use the Olympic Park Reclaimed Water Scheme as an example. Then we'll run through the 10 steps to compiling a water safety plan, which is based on World Health Authority best practice. Vicky will run us through the water reuse safety plan template example, which we have drawn up as part of this project. And we use an example for this template of the community scale grey water recycling scheme. The template could be used for any type of recycling scheme, but for simplicity and to get the concept across, that is what we've gone for in this report. And then we'll just cover conclusions and next steps. Just to say that the basis of this presentation that we're giving is it's all captured in the report that we've written that's just still at the draft stage. So introduction overview. So the background, for those of you who are unaware, and I apologise for those who are very close to the Enabling Water Smart Communities project, because you'll know about quite a few of the outputs from the project already, but we thought it'd be helpful for everyone on this webinar to assume that we have the same base level, and some people might not know about the project. So one of the outputs earlier on, at the end of last year, was a roadmap for community scale reuse, and that was drawn together as a result of a series of workshops that we had with water industry people, academia, and also regulators. And I'm sure you won't be able to read this. It's not intended that you can actually read the roadmap, but I've just put it up so you can see the types of things that we were looking at. We were looking at what activities needed to happen to really enable water reuse to move forward over the next few years. And this is the roadmap that was produced. And just to home in, one of the areas was developing policy and regulations. And if you can read it, one of the policy and regulations, or one of the activities, was to look at water safety plans in the concept of what we were doing in reuse. So that was over sort of 25-26 time horizon. So the roadmap for community scale reuse was, as I say, one of these outputs, and it did recommend the water reuse safety plan approach. The second piece of work that's been done under the EWSC banner in this area is a report that was called the Single Source of Truth report, and that was an attempt to look at all of the regulations and legislation that was around relating to community scale reuse, and try and put it all together and identify whether there are any ambiguities to really help potential practitioners get an idea of where they could go to get information. Unfortunately, quite a lot of information we found is a bit outdated, and some areas need work going forward. For example, who can and can't supply reclaimed water under the regulations, and these are areas that the DEFRA are looking at the moment. But one important output of the finding of the Single Source of Truth report was that risk assessments are a key tool that were recommended in the guidance and methodologies we reviewed as part of this report. And if they are thoroughly and diligently undertaken, they could possibly be an effective tool to help advance projects in the interim, because there are ambiguities, and while these ambiguities are being resolved and new legislation is being sorted out, and new bodies and guidance are being developed, then carrying out a comprehensive risk assessment is a good way to advance projects in the interim. So two outputs already, which is suggesting that safety plans are a useful way forward. So just a brief review of the concept. Water safety plans are used in drinking water a lot. And again, I apologise to those of you who are practitioners of water safety plans already. This will be bread and butter to you, but there are many people who perhaps haven't come across them and are new to the area. So just a little bit of information. They're very successful and widely implemented around the world, actually, and we use them in the UK for drinking water. Some of the key documents that relate to safety plans are the WHO Water Safety Plan Manual, which was just reissued relatively recently, 2023. Our own regulations in the UK, our water supply, water quality regs of 2016. Regulation 28 requires water companies or water suppliers to carry out risk assessments and using the water safety plan approach. And interestingly, the WHO also have brought out a sanitation safety planning manual in 2022, which is the same sort of concept, the same sort of approach, but looking at from a dirty water perspective. So the way it's approached is fairly standard, but it can be, safety plans can be undertaken at very different levels. So if you're in a sort of developing environment, developing country, then the safety plan might be quite simple. In the UK, many water companies have quite a complex computerized system which manages their safety plans. And it really, to summarize, it's a multi-barrier approach to preventing risk and looking at water supply from source to tap So for drinking water, you're looking from drinking water supply to where the water comes out of the tap. And taking the same approach for reused water, you look at where you're collecting the alternative water supply from, be it rainwater, grey water, black water, and mapping it through its whole journey to when it's used at the end use for irrigation, toilet flushing, whatever. So the same concept, but it has been recognised that when you're looking at a water safety plan for reuse, you perhaps need a slightly broader dimension of risk, reflecting the greater uncertainties and the different risk interactions that you have in a reuse system. So using the concept well over 10 years ago now, Thames Water compiled a reclaimed water safety plan for the system that they were implementing at the Olympic Park. And again, many of you will have heard of this, but just for the benefit of those of you that haven't, quickly take you through what that involved. The Olympic Park Blackwater recycling was a Thames Water research initiative in 2012 for the Olympics. It helped the Olympic Park meet its sustainability objectives, and the reclaimed water was used for non-potable uses around the park. Quite a large plant. There's a photograph of the plant here at Old Ford, a membrane plant, 574 metres cubed a day, mostly in the end used for irrigation, but also for other non-potable uses in the area. So this is a very simplified overview schematic, and this is a type of system diagram that one would produce for a safety plan approach. So I'm not expecting you to look at all the detail of this, but just to sort of get the idea that the first asset group that was looked at in terms of this source to tap journey is that the raw sewage was mined from a large sewer in East London. That was the first asset group. The second asset group was the treatment stage. So the raw sewage was treated in the plant that I showed you the photograph of in the previous slide at Old Ford. Then the reclaimed water was distributed around the whole Olympic Park in a dedicated network. And finally, the final asset group that's considered in the plan is the customer end, and that is subdivided into two areas. So firstly, the reclaimed water risks associated with the venues and the end uses, so the irrigation, toilet flushing, the stadium, etc. What risks need to be mitigated in using reclaimed water in those circumstances, those end uses. And then also we looked at how the customers or individuals who might come in contact with the reclaimed water might be affected, and how one would mitigate any risk to them. So that could be the irrigators, the competitors, the facilities managers, the general public even walking in the park itself. And once the whole of the safety plan and the risk assessments were completed, and the detail of that we're going to go through later on in this presentation, we came up with, this is the sort of final snapshot of what the advantages of having a safety plan can bring. This is a table showing the distribution of risk, if you like. And so we looked at 51 different potential risk situations, and the red risks were mostly found in the customer venue arenas. And so having a safety plan approach helps you to sort of home in on which are the most important areas to deal with first as part of your action plan. So in this case, the red risks were to do with unmarked underground pipework, reclaimed pipework, unlagged irrigation pipework and Legionella risk. And also a lot of places seem to think it's a good idea to top up reclaimed water with untreated rainwater, and that can have quite a detrimental effect on the overall quality of the final product. So just a sort of snapshot of how using the safety plan and the approach can help you to identify where you really want to concentrate your efforts going forward. A little bit about governance. Because reclaimed water at this scale was a new in the UK at the time. It was a bit unclear about how the whole system should be managed. So in consultation with all the regulators, DWI, EA, HPA at the time, etc., it was agreed that compiling a safety plan, a reclaimed water safety plan, would be a good way to sort of proceed. So that's why one of the reasons why the plan was compiled. It was then reviewed by the regulators, and the Environment Agency issued what was called a regulatory position statement, and that was the mechanism at that time for us to be able to feel confident that we could continue with the project. It also, the safety plan also led on to a whole raft of actions, internal actions as well, because as part of the plan you have what's called an action plan column. So we could develop procedures and new ways of working. And what's quite important is to bear in mind that it's a dynamic document with ongoing review, and that it's reviewed at agreed periodic stages. So that's just a brief overview to sort of set the scene of how it worked all those years ago at the Olympic Park, but very few large schemes have progressed since then. So going forward, I thought it'd be useful just to give you an overview of the way that the WHO approach this, and then how that feeds into the template that we've drawn up to help practitioners maybe move forward. And it's important to say that the way to do a safety plan, it's not prescriptive. It's very much very flexible. It should be the plan should be formulated to work best for the situation that it's designed for. Just understanding what the key steps are is useful. So in terms of how the WHO set it out, and I would recommend their manual. It's beautifully laid out. It's got lots of very simple to follow diagrams and templates, and it's intended for all levels of schemes, all different types of schemes. So these are the 10 steps that they suggest: assembling a team, describing the system, identifying the hazards. I'm not going to read them all out. You can see them all listed out there, but just to say that in this presentation, Vicky is going to, and I are talking more about steps 2, 3, and 4, because those are the steps that are sort of the ones that you do at the beginning of a scheme, and also they're the slightly more complex. 3 and 4 are the slightly more complex ones, whereas 5 to 10 are fairly obvious and straightforward in some more, you could say. And the format that we used for our safety plans has been a multi-sheet spreadsheet. But as I said, you can choose whatever format works for the team and the safety plan that you're involved in. It doesn't have to be a spreadsheet. It could be any format, as long as it works for you. So I'm going to hand over to Vicky now, and she's just going to walk through a bit more of the template example.
Thanks for that, Sian. Yeah, I'm Vicky Williams, one of the directors at Arup, and I'm going to cover some of the work that we've done recently on the water reuse safety plan template. Just to say that there is an intention to publish an accompanying document and the template out there, so people can see much more of the detailed hazardous events and risks that we covered during this example. So it would be a starting point for people who want to embrace on this journey. I think probably from the thing you would have mentioned, although I'm going to concentrate on steps 2, 3, and 4, it's really important that we focus on who are the key teams that would need to be involved in this. And in traditional water safety planning, there's a lot of that stays within the boundary of a water company organisation. But I think if we look at the example where we're undertaking a community reuse, you will be engaging with potentially developers, designers, urban planners, and some of the customer representatives themselves, or potentially there may be a number of different water companies if there is a NAV in place. So we've highlighted here just a range of number of different stakeholders and participants that might need to be involved in that process, and it really is important that all of these views are captured. And I think one of the main important roles that we've identified is that ownership role, and having that team leader who can kind of coordinate all of these different experts to get the outcome that you're looking for. Let me just talk about the system that we were looking at here, and on the screen is a schematic, and it's really important within the safety plan is to put a really good description in the step two part of the safety plan approach, is really describing the system. So Sean and I worked with this hypothetical example. So, you know, other examples are available, but we're really talking about community scale grey water recycling schemes, but there can be alternative and other sources of water. But just for the purposes of this indicative plan, we used a grey water source, which was coming out of the customers' homes, you can see, and the yellow highlighted parts represent the interfaces between customer and a reuse provider. And then it goes on to the specific types of treatment plants and the various different manufacturers and deliverers of these different treatment plants, and they could be also operating and maintaining the system, and so are key players and partners that need to be involved. And we assumed also here that there would be a reuse water distribution network, and this sometime, because it's underground, is one of the areas that often gets forgotten in terms of the pipe work. And also just bearing in mind, if we are having these reuse systems in these dual pipe systems, there may need to be redesign on both of them, on understanding the water system as a whole to these customer premises. And then finally, the customers themselves, there needs to be a really good understanding of what the purpose of the reuse water is being used for in there. So for the purposes of this example, we talked about how we would use it for WC flushing, washing machines, and potential irrigation. So once the system is described, and it's quite good to put the schematic in there, the next step in the process is really identifying the hazards and the hazardous events. So I'll take you through an example one that we have developed here, which is around what happens if there is a contamination of the source grey water. So that's the hazard. And then what is the event that could happen from that hazardous event? So something that is inappropriate could be discharged into that grey water collection system. And this is where some of the parameters that you can think about come in there, and you can see what people potentially would be using in the home. There could be various chemicals that could be used, or oil, or grease, or indeed, you know, in certain circumstances, you can get fecal matter entering the system if people are kind of doing certain things in the bath system that you know that you wouldn't expect. So it's about thinking about what could happen as well. We also need to consider that if people don't like these systems, there could be potential malicious damage that could happen around there. So it's really understanding what those hazardous events are. Then there might be some additional commentary that you might put on there from what you've seen, and this could come from examples that you may have seen from before of circumstances that have happened before. And this is where the circumstance here where, you know, a householder may put inappropriate material in the sink or a bath, which may impact on the grey water collection or any of the other downstream assets. Oops, sorry, back. Yeah. And then moving along, then you'll think about how you mitigate and control, and what potential monitoring that you could put into this place around looking at these hazardous events. Just want to sort of talk about the risk assessment, and there are other the metrics out there, but overall what we looked at here is a risk assessment is based on the likelihood of something happening and the consequence. But in what we need to look at and what the recommendations through there, you can have a single stage risk assessment, which just looks at the risk at the end once you've put in the mitigation measures, or you might consider having a dual stage approach. Now, the drinking water ones tend to have the dual stage approach in there, so which looks at the risk assessment before you put any control measures in place or any mitigation, so you can see a change in the risk, and you hopefully will see a drop in that risk over that. But with some of the reuse schemes, when Sean and I went through the programme, you have to realise that the pre-mitigation risk is usually nearly always high. So you're always starting off from that kind of very red place. So what we decided to do in this, for the purposes of the template example, was just to incorporate a single stage post-mitigation mechanism, which represented what we thought the residual risk would be. Just a small commentary on likelihood scoring, and there can be some debates on the incidences around likelihood scoring. Up on the top one of the screen is the one that we actually used during the Olympic Park, and actually put some timing around that, when we would expect to see the incidents around that. But the WHO example keeps it in these descriptive parameters from very unlikely all the way through to almost certain. The consequences also can also be variable, and on screen now is the one that we used around the Olympic Park example, that goes from little or no impact to extremely severe impact, including substantial cross-contamination, illness, significant failures, or flooding events, and sustained loss of power are the sort of things that were at the high consequence scoring example. So just moving on here is a sample risk assessment, and when we publish the template, there are tens of these in there, up to about 50 types of hazard that we've identified through the whole process. But to give you an idea of the process we went through, the example here is that contamination of that source grey water. So the hazardous event then would be what was the inappropriate substance that was discharged to that grey water collection system, and then how that actually happened and came about, because how that happened may be really important for you to assess what mitigation that you might put in place, and what assets are actually affected, or downstream assets that may be affected. And then what control measures that you were proposing here, and it's fair to say on there, some of these might be quite hard measures to implement. You know, for instance, where these customer risks are is where you might have to train or educate the householders on what is actually suitable to be discharged into the grey water system. The other things to think about is, what does that mean in terms of the treatment protocols or operating procedures that you've got at the treatment plant. And during, for instance, the Olympic Part 1, we had some very extensive operating procedures across the area that served as some of that mitigation effect. Some of the ones that don't often get called out is actually the source of the collection pipe work, and making sure there's appropriate specification for those robustness, and also the installers and managers of that pipe work are suitably understand the implication of if this particular hazard and hazardous event comes to pass. And some of the things then on there, the monitoring and validation is about some of that sampling strategy that you need to put in place. And that can be part of this plan as well, of which kind of parameters that you need to be sampling to make sure you understand, or even proxy parameters that could give you an indication that needs to be involved. But given these will be probably provided by third-party providers, it's very important to get their kind of input in there. And, you know, we've been working closely with the Reuse Association in terms of some of those things, and they can be very helpful in getting these monitoring regimes up and running in their systems as well. So then we come to the scoring, which is, as I said, was the post risk scoring that we think now we are able to kind of think that this is a reasonably acceptable level. But we will not stand on our laurels here, and we'll make sure that we have the appropriate action plan in place that we can monitor against. So we would produce the householder information pack. We'd have something in place when there's change of occupier in the homes, that there would be site operating manuals on the treatment plant, and they would be reviewed at least on an annual basis, or when there are any changes into the treatment process. And there would also be a specification for the grey water collection pipe work, and that it would have been installed correctly and with the appropriate sign-off. I think Sean mentioned this point, but it's very important that these are always live documents, and that when there's any changes to the system, that you are continually updating that. And also to be aware that, you know, it is based on this subjective scoring around what the different parties think is around acceptable risk. So just to run you through the concept, which we'll be publishing. Here are the first one, which I've talked about, was the importance of the team, and I've run you through describing the system and how you'd go about identifying those hazards and hazardous events, and looking at those control measures and making sure there's an appropriate measure of risk. But it doesn't end there. This is a continuous improvement process, so we would always want to say, also, as new technology comes on board, what are we doing in terms of planning for improvement? Can this be delivered in a better way? Are the control measures in place actually suitable? Because the monitoring can change over time. There's increasing accuracy of monitoring devices, and it's always important to map the devices to what levels that you're trying to look at. And also there should be someone who steps back and looks at the effectiveness of the safety plan. You know, you shouldn't be just doing this for the sake of filling in the paperwork. Is it actually effective at helping us drive and manage risk? And all the time there needs to be those appropriate management procedures that need to be kept under review, and that they are being implemented. Bearing in mind there's a number of different stakeholders across the group, that information needs to be shared and disseminated. And there may be other supporting programs that are in here, and you can also highlight the fact that this would have to potentially fit in with water companies' safety plans. So how does this move in parallel with that? What happens when you've got different water and sewer providers? So how do you manage all the supporting programs of that? And the very important one is making sure that this is constantly reviewed and updated, and there is a suitable owner of the system. As Sean said, there's various formats, but we intend to publish a kind of a multi-sheet spreadsheet, which will be available on the WaterSmart Communities website shortly for any parties that would want to do that. And we're very happy to receive any feedback on that for all participants on this call and wider. So in terms of that conclusions, what did we think and what did we learn from here? we actually think that the safety plan approach actually is a recommended way forward for reuse type water activity, particularly when looking at these community scale recycling schemes, where I think when Sean showed you that when we did the Olympic Park, the red risks sat on the customer side quite rightly. We think in this case, this is also true because you've got 2 touch points from when the water comes into the system and when the water goes out of the system. But there are some challenges in the UK context in implementing and utilising this approach successfully. And one of these things is around the owner of the assets and where all the responsibility lies from that. Who are the owners? Who are the operators? Who are the stewards of that system? And through Water Smart Communities, we've been concentrating a lot on those stewardship models and what does that mean? So it's really important to take that into account, which is I think a real distinction from classic safety planning approach. There will be different owners and operating of the assets within the system. There's a real understanding, well, there needs to be a real understanding of which regulators or entities should be responsible for signing off this approach, and if when it goes wrong, what are the challenges or issues around dealing with any failures within these systems. The next one is, how do we make sure capacity is built across all the people who are involved on this, from the homeowners themselves to the installers of pipework, to the treatment providers, to the water utilities, to the NAVs who may be involved in actually building these systems. And do all of those practitioners and stakeholders understand how a safety plan is agreed, how it's verified, and do they feel confident about the actions that are aligned to them in the plan, and do they have the legitimacy to proceed? Just to say, I think I've said it before, but the template spreadsheet will be available, but it does have this accompanying safety plan methodology, which will be published on the Water Smart Communities. We've sent the DWI a draft copy of the report, and there is a reuse working group to look at these areas that need to be implemented when these types of systems get utilised. So I'll just pause there and say thanks for listening to us.
And thank you, Vicky and Sean. That was an excellent run through. I feel like I know quite a lot now about water safety plans, which is good. And I think those reflections just at the end on responsibility and regulation, ownership as well, and capacity building. Those are big challenges or big things that we need to work through, aren't they, as we take this forwards. So we've got about 15 minutes, just under, for some questions. We've had one come through in the Q&A. Please do add further thoughts and questions there. And then we had a couple in advance as well. So I'll go to the one that came in on the Q&A, which was from David Nag. So David is asking about the use of non-standard, non-potable pipework and fittings that would provide significant mitigation to avoid customer cross connections. But to make this economical, it needs large-scale uptake. And what's the best way to achieve that large-scale uptake? Any suggest, would it be recycling on new build developments?
That's a really, really good question. And it's probably for some of the water companies to comment on that as well. But in certain areas, there probably will have to be potentially significant uptake if we are having to deliver all the homes in the areas that we are going to provide. So I agree with what David said. Some of those non-standard pipe fittings, they can be more expensive, and I think we had that experience on the Olympic Park one, wasn't it, about sourcing the material and replacement material. I'll just probably hand over to Sean to see if she's got a comment.
That's true. I mean, we tried to we had to source black pipe with green stripe, which was the standard at the time, and it was quite difficult to get because if the suppliers don't have demand for it, they're not going to hold stocks of it, etc. So this is an issue that we have highlighted in some of the other work we've done for the project as well, that the supply chain needs to be positioned to move forward with this as well. Yeah,
there's also sort of storing that pipework and accessing it and when there's problems. So yeah, I don't know whether it would come down to a sort of a mandated approach. I think obviously in the Act, water companies have an absolute duty for domestic purposes and how they achieve that, but I think it'll be all dependent on what approaches get put in to manage the balancing out of the whole water supply system and the resources. I mean, I don't know whether George, if you might want to come in here on that from your point of view.
We got George on the call. I'm not sure we do actually, looking at the participant list. We did have a question in advance about should we be mandating dual pipe systems? And if so, what's the kind of, how do we overcome the legal issue?
Yeah, I mean, that's another good question, and that's a question that we have discussed quite a lot in previous workshops and pieces of work we've done around this whole topic. And I think this is an area that's under debate at the moment with the government and DEFRA about how to move forward with reclaimed recycled water projects.
And potentially what other legislation needs to come into effect to make some of that happen.
Yes, and there's the issue about wholesome water and water companies only being able to supply wholesome water to homes, and wholesome water means drinking water, potable water. So at the moment, it's not possible, as far as I understand it, from the legislation for water companies to supply that water. I'm just looking at other questions that have come in on the chat. Sharon said, thank you, really interesting. She's going on to another meeting. We had another question in advance about water reuse in older properties, so retrofitting reuse, and whether that was a common thing, whether you had any experience with that.
I haven't had much experience of that, and I from my previous work, I think it's quite tricky to do that actually, and quite expensive.
Yes, because I guess you've got to get in the other set of pipe work, which involves going into walls and things.
Yeah.
I guess, Kat, it links into the some of the other work led by Anglian Water on the business case around capital cost and OPEX cost of doing that, because it's a reasonable cost on new properties. So we haven't looked at retrofit, but you can imagine that it's going to be more.
Yes.
But at least understanding what the whole life cost is for these types of scheme for at least new developments is definitely what is being looked at here.
Yeah, so we could share the link to that report actually, Vicky, in the chat, couldn't we? The report that looked into the installation costs on new developments. That's probably quite a helpful thing to share.
Yeah, and the fact they're sort of looking at the potential operating cost of that will also be published as well as part of this stream of work.
And Nathan's just put it in the chat. Thank you. Okay, we've had a question in from Paul Jeffrey. So he enjoyed the presentation and welcomes the safety plan approach. There are a very wide range of water reuse scheme types and scales. Are there any that the safety plan might not be well suited to?
I think you're probably asking the wrong people, because Sean and I are safety plan advocates.
I would say that from what I know about the approach, that really any scheme could benefit from having this type of step-by-step look at how the system works. And my understanding is, from what I read, the WHO, etc., and the work that we've done, is that it's a very flexible approach, and any scheme would benefit from just having a go, even if it doesn't fit into conventional knowledge of how these schemes work. I can't imagine that you couldn't have a risk assessment approach to any recycling scheme, actually.
Thanks, Sian. I had a question about sort of ownership and maintenance of these schemes. In your experience, has it always been a water company or a NAV doing that in this country? And do you think we could move to a place where it could be managed by the community?
I think with the appropriate training, the approach is very accessible and methodological. So if I can say that, methodological. So I think as long as the appropriate training and advice were given, I think you have to be really careful on who are the trusted and responsible persons, and who is ultimately responsible. And if it comes down to a serious incident happening, you really have to understand what the implications of that are.
Yeah.
But in terms of deploying the approach, it's very easy to do once you know how.
And I suppose the development of the supply chain skills needs to happen as well. So if it were managed by a community, they would be able to reach out to certified plumbers or whatever to support with the maintenance and fixing of issues.
Theoretically, but I think that's one of the issues that's been flagged up in this project in general, that there is a lack of personnel and technical staff who are knowledgeable in the area. And capacity building is a really important feature that needs to be thought about if these schemes are going to really take off.
Yeah, but actually that's a nice segue into talking about our other webinars coming up. So if we can go to the next slide. Yes. So we have 3 more webinars coming up in the autumn webinar series. And the first one is about bridging the skills gap for water reuse. So exactly what you were saying, Sian, there. So that's on the 5th of November. And that will be talking through some analysis that the project did with WaterWise on skills for water reuse. Then we've got one on the 19th of November looking at the impacts of water conservation on the sewer system. So one of the, I guess, potential negative impacts of saving water, reusing water, is that in the sewer system, there may potentially not be enough flow for it to operate effectively. So we've done some modelling with Arup and Thames Water looking into that. So that's going to be the focus of the webinar on the 19th. Then on the 26th of November, we've got a webinar about water ledger technology. Now, this is where my brain power isn't quite up to understanding or explaining this. So Vicky, as you've been involved in this, I wondered whether you wanted to say a sentence or two about that one.
Yeah, so as people will probably be aware of the emergence of blockchain as a type of technology, which is what is known as water ledger technology. And we've done a piece of work to explore potential use cases that could be using this technology, which just basically gives you an immutable source of truth So if you think about things like trading across boundaries where there are other wider stakeholders involved in transactions, we've started to explore how this could work on these for a water smart community. And so we'll be presenting some of the initial research on a number of use cases that we thought might be interesting to think about pilots in this area.
Great, thank you. So follow that QR code on the screen and you can register for those webinars coming up. And all the reports that are coming out through Enabling Water Smart Communities are on our website. And I think well, if you follow that QR code, it takes you to our website, and then there's a tab along the top for reports. And actually, I think Nathan's put it in the chat as well. I can't see any other questions. Oh, maybe that have come through. Is there something in the chat? But there's some discussion about whether water companies can supply non-potable water to homes in the chat. So David Nags and Anna Reeves have just put a couple of notes in there. But otherwise, I don't think we've had any more comments or questions. Is there anything Vicky or Sean you wanted to say as a final send-off?
Well, thank you for everyone for listening, and I think just have a go is what is what I would suggest.
Yeah, definitely. This is a great approach. It's proven and tested. Why don't we use it for all types of reuse water?